The crack of the rifle was singular, a dry, definitive snap that sliced through the cacophony of battle. It was unlike the frantic chatter of the M4S or the heavy, rhythmic thud of the enemy machine gun. Down in the wadi, pinned behind a crumbling mud-brick wall, SEAL Lieutenant Commander Evan Ghost Lead Kalen flinched. He hadn't given a fire order. His own team's sniper, Falcon, was repositioning, his 300 Win mag silent. Kalen keyed his calm. Who just shot? Who the hell just took that shot? The question hung in the dusty, cordite-choked air. Up on the ridge, 200 meters away, the insurgent spotter who had been calling down mortar fire with lethal precision simply ceased to exist. His binoculars fell, glinting in the harsh sun, followed a moment later by his body. Silence from command. Then, a flicker of light from a distant mountain peak overlooking the entire valley, a place thought to be inaccessible. One long, deliberate flash from a signal mirror. A ghost acknowledging its work. Anya Petrova had arrived at Forward Operating Base Viper 3 days earlier, a ghost of a different sort. She moved through the swirling dust and organized chaos of the base with an economy of motion that rendered her nearly invisible. She was a woman of 62, her face a roadmap of hard-won wrinkles, her hair a tight, severe bun of iron gray. Her official designation was Senior Intelligence Analyst, a late-career deployment to a restive province in Afghanistan, ostensibly to analyze atmospheric data and its effect on drone surveillance. No one looked at her twice. She was just another civilian contractor, another piece of the vast, grinding logistical machine of war. The young Marines and soldiers, taught with muscle and nervous energy, saw only an old woman, someone's grandmother, misplaced and irrelevant. They sidestepped her without a word, their eyes fixed on horizons she had been watching since before they were born. She carried a single, long, heavy-duty Pelican case, its weight incongruous with her supposed role. Inside the mess hall, she sat alone, eating methodically, her gaze sweeping the room, cataloging the faces, the postures, the subtle hierarchies of men at war. She noted the way the Special Forces operators from Ghost Team carried themselves, a loose-limbed predatory grace that set them apart from the rigid formality of the regular infantry. She saw the exhaustion in the eyes of the young PFCs on perimeter duty, the overconfidence in the lieutenants fresh from officer training. She absorbed it all, filed it away. Her assigned quarters were a small, windowless container at the far edge of the compound, next to the constant hum of the generators. Suited her. Anonymity was a form of armor. She unpacked with practiced efficiency. A few sets of sterile clothes, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and from the long case, a rifle. It was a heavily modified Dragunov SVD, a weapon most Western soldiers would dismiss as an antique. But in her hands, it was an extension of her will. The wood of the stock was dark and smooth, worn by her own grip over decades. The steel of the barrel was immaculate. She assembled it not like a soldier preparing for duty, but like a musician tuning a rare and precious instrument. Her movements were a silent language of devotion. She checked the custom-fitted trigger group, the finely milled scope mount, the pristine bore. This was not a tool for data analysis. This was a tool for punctuation. At the end of a sentence, at the end of a life, she was a footnote in the base's personnel manifest, a bureaucratic error to be managed. But she knew her true purpose, even if no one else did. The mountains were calling, and she had come to answer. Colonel Marcus Thorne, the FOB commander, finally noticed her on the second day. He was a man carved from the same granite as the surrounding mountains, a career infantry officer who believed wars were won with overwhelming firepower and aggressive patrols. He did not believe in subtleties. He found Anya on an observation platform on the western perimeter, not looking at a data tablet, but through a pair of powerful Steiner binoculars, her gaze fixed on the distant peaks. Her rifle case was propped against the sandbags beside her. "Petrova," he barked, making her name sound like an accusation. She lowered the binoculars slowly, her eyes, the color of a winter sky, meeting his. There was no deference in them, only assessment. "Colonel," she replied, her voice low and even. "Official title is Senior Analyst." What exactly are you analyzing up here? The migratory patterns of vultures. His tone was laced with the condescending patience of a man dealing with a troublesome civilian. Wind, Colonel. Thermals. The way the dust settles in the ravines after a vehicle passes. It tells a story, he scoffed. A short, sharp burst of air. The only story I'm interested in is the one my patrols write. What's in the box? He asked, nudging the Pelican case with his boot. Personal effects. That's a rifle case, Miss Petrova. I'm not an idiot. We have highly trained sniper teams on this base. We don't need analysts playing soldier. His eyes narrowed. You're here to look at satellite imagery and weather charts. Your desk is in the TOC. I suggest you get to it. And keep that antique locked up. I don't want it getting mixed up with the real equipment. Stay out of the way of the men who do the actual fighting. It was a clear dismissal. A public dressing down meant to put her in her place. Anya simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She offered no defense, no explanation. Her stillness seemed to irritate him more than any argument would have. He saw a stubborn old woman clinging to a past he couldn't be bothered to understand. She saw a commander who looked at the mountains but did not see them, a man who mistook noise for effect. She picked up her case and walked away, her back straight, her dignity an invisible shield. In the Tactical Operations Center, a cavern of humming servers and glowing screens, she was assigned a workstation in a dim corner. The task was mind-numbing, cross-referencing atmospheric data logs with drone flight records. It was busy work, designed to keep her occupied and contained. Thorne wanted her buried in data, a harmless eccentric neutralized by bureaucracy. He had no idea that for Anya, all data was relevant. Anya performed the tedious work assigned to her, but her real focus remained outside the windowless walls of the TOC. During her breaks, she returned to the perimeter. Not to the main observation posts where she might be seen, but to forgotten corners, overlooked sections of the wire where a person could watch unseen. She borrowed topographical maps from the intelligence section, ostensibly for her atmospheric analysis. At night, in the privacy of her container, she didn't study weather patterns. She studied the land. She traced the deep wadis and hidden draws with a fingertip, memorizing the contours, the potential fields of fire, the dead ground where an enemy could approach undetected. She cross-referenced the maps with her own direct observations. She noted a specific gully on the southeastern approach, one that was obscured from both the main gate's guard tower and the primary sniper overwatch position on the roof of the barracks. It was a subtle flaw in the base's defensive layout, a natural corridor shielded by a fold in the earth. She watched the local shepherds, the way their flocks moved. For 2 days, she'd seen them deliberately avoid that gully, a deviation from their normal grazing routes. It was a small thing, a detail no one else would notice. To Anya, it was a siren. She spent an hour each evening maintaining her rifle. The process was a ritual, a form of meditation. She broke it down completely, cleaning every pin and spring with meticulous care. She used a specific oil, a custom blend she mixed herself, protecting the metal from the fine, pervasive dust. She polished the lens of her scope, a vintage optic but one with glass so pure it seemed to bend light to its will. A young corporal named Davis, on his way to the generator sheds, once saw her through the open door of her container. He saw the disassembled rifle, the focused intensity on her face. He saw not an analyst, but something else, something he couldn't name. It was a look he'd seen once before, on a grizzled sergeant major who had taught him that the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield was a calm heart. He said nothing and hurried on his way. The image burned into his mind. Anya was preparing. She felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere of the valley, a tension that had nothing to do with barometric pressure. The air was growing heavy with intent. The story the wind and dust had been telling her was reaching its climax. The flaw in the base's design, the shepherd's avoidance, the growing stillness in the local village, it was all data. And her analysis pointed to one simple, unavoidable conclusion. They were coming. The attack began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A single, muffled thump from the southeast, followed by a cascade of explosions as pre-placed IEDs detonated along the main patrol route, a diversion. Then the true assault came, exactly as Anya had predicted, pouring out of the shielded gully. RPGs slammed into the perimeter wall, and the heavy, distinctive hammering of a DSHK heavy machine gun opened up from a ridge overlooking the FOB. Chaos erupted in the TOC. Voices yelled over the internal comms, screens flashed red with threat indicators, and Colonel Thorne stood in the center of it all, barking orders, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Get me a fix on that DSHK. Where is our counter-battery? Air support is 20 minutes out." A report crackled over the radio, laced with the panic of incoming fire. It was Ghost Team. They had been on a reconnaissance patrol and were caught outside the wire, attempting to flank the main insurgent force. Ghost lead to Viper Command, we are pinned down. Heavy and accurate sniper fire from the eastern ridge. We can't move. Falcon is trying to get a bead, but he can't acquire the target. This guy is good, he's using the terrain. The voice of Ghost lead, usually a rock of calm, was strained. They were trapped in a kill zone. The FOB's own snipers, positioned on the barracks roof, responded. Viper Overwatch to command, we do not have a line of sight on the enemy sniper. He's dug in deep, using the rocks for cover. We can't see him. The pressure in the TOC ratcheted up. They were blind. The SEALs, their most elite asset, were being picked apart, and the base's own defenses were proving inadequate. Thorne's face was grim. He saw his carefully constructed plans, his aggressive patrols, his belief in overwhelming force, all unraveling because of one well-positioned sniper he couldn't see and a machine gun his men couldn't silence. Men were screaming on the radio. The neat lines on his tactical map dissolved into a bloody, chaotic mess. Panic was a contagion, and it was beginning to spread. In her corner, Anya Petrova closed her eyes for a single moment, filtering out the noise. She listened to the cadence of the enemy fire, the specific reports from Ghost Team. She already knew where the sniper was. She had seen the spot 2 days ago. A small, unnatural shadow in a fissure of rock, a perfect nest. While the TOC descended into a vortex of organized panic, Anya Petrova moved with a chilling serenity. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping unnoticed on the floor. She walked out of the command center, her movements deliberate, unhurried. No one stopped her. No one even saw her leave. They were all staring at the screens, at the digital representation of a battle that was being lost in blood and dirt a few hundred meters away. She went directly to her container. The distant thud of mortars and the crackle of small arms fire were the soundtrack to her methodical preparation. She stripped off her civilian analyst's vest and pulled on a simple, faded olive drab jacket. She tied her gray hair back, securing any loose strands. From its case she lifted the Dragunov. Felt balanced, familiar, a part of her. She slid 2 magazines into her pockets, each loaded with 10 rounds of 7N14 sniper-grade ammunition she had brought with her. Another personal effect no one had thought to question. She bypassed the main defensive positions, avoiding the frantic rush of soldiers moving to reinforce the southeastern wall. She headed instead to a spot she had chosen days before. A gap in the parapet atop the northern Hesco barrier, a position that offered a clear, if incredibly long, line of sight to both the insurgent machine gun nest and the ridge where the enemy sniper was hiding. It was an unorthodox position, one no trained military sniper would choose. It was too exposed, the angle too oblique. But it was also the only position on the base that could see both threats simultaneously. She laid her small sandbag on the barrier, resting the rifle's forestock gently upon it. She was invisible in the larger chaos. Alone, gray figure against a backdrop of brown earth and gray walls. She dialed her scope, her fingers moving with the certainty of a watchmaker. She knew the distance by heart. 975 meters to the machine gun, 1150 meters to the sniper's fissure. She felt the wind, a gentle but fickle crosswind from the west. She could feel its pressure on her cheek, see its effect on the dust devils dancing in the valley. She didn't need a kestrel wind meter. She was the meter. She chambered around. The click was solid, final. She settled behind the scope, her body becoming as still as the rocks around her. Her breathing slowed. 1 beat, 2 beats. In the world outside her optic lens vanished. There was only the target. First, the sniper harassing the SEALs. He was the greater threat. She found his nest, a dark slit in the sun-bleached rock. A flicker of movement, a muzzle flash. She adjusted her aim. Up 2 clicks, left 1.5. She held her breath. The crosshairs settled. The world went silent. She pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a familiar and comforting jolt. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. On the eastern ridge, the insurgent sniper who had been methodically dismantling Ghost Team's position was in the middle of reloading. He felt a sudden, violent impact, a physical shockwave that seemed to pass through the rock in front of him before it struck him in the center of his chest. He never heard the shot. He simply collapsed, his rifle clattering against the stones. Down in the wadi, Ghost Lead saw the enemy fire cease. "Falcon, did you get him?" he yelled. "Negative, Ghost Lead. That wasn't me. I still don't have a visual." Back at the FOB, Anya had already cycled the bolt, the empty brass casing ejecting in a graceful arc. Her eye never left the scope. She shifted her aim, panning smoothly across the valley to the DSHK emplacement. The gunner was exposed, caught up in the thrill of the fight, spraying rounds at the FOB's walls. Anya didn't hesitate. She didn't need to recalculate the distance, only the windage. Her mind was a biological computer, processing the variables with terrifying speed. Another breath held. Another gentle press. The second shot was as perfect as the first. The heavy machine gun, a weapon that had filled the air with its terrifying roar, fell silent. The gunner slumped over his weapon, a neat, dark hole in the side of his helmet. The sudden silence was more shocking than the noise had been. In the TOC, a drone operator stared at his screen, his mouth agape. "Target down. DSHK is neutralized. I repeat, the DSHK is neutralized." Colonel Thorne spun around. "By what? Who has the shot?" "Unknown, sir. Came from somewhere on the north side of the base, I think. Overwatch says it wasn't them." On the open comms channel, Ghost Lead's voice crackled, stripped of its earlier tension and filled with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "Viper Command, who the hell just took out that sniper? That was over 1,000 meters through rock and a crosswind. That was a 1 in a million shot." The FOB's own sniper team leader came on the line, his voice humbled. "Command, Viper Overwatch confirms. That was not our shot. We couldn't even see him. Whoever that is, they're a ghost." Thorne stared at the tactical map, his mind racing. The northern perimeter? That was just generators and storage containers. There was no one stationed there. Then, a young corporal, the same one who had seen Anya cleaning her rifle, stepped forward, his face pale. It was Davis. He cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir." "Colonel Thorne, Sir." Thorne wheeled on him. "What is it, Corporal?" I think I know who it was, sir." He pointed a trembling finger toward the tactical display, toward the quiet, forgotten northern wall. "It was the old woman, the analyst, Petrova. I saw her heading that way with a rifle case." Colonel Thorne stared at Corporal Davis as if the young man had just started speaking in tongues. The idea was absurd, a hallucination born of combat stress. An elderly civilian analyst, making 2 impossible shots in under a minute that his own elite snipers and a SEAL team couldn't manage? It defied all logic, all training, all sense. But the DSHK was silent. The SEALs were no longer taking fire. The evidence was undeniable. The impossible had happened. "Are you certain, Corporal?" Thorne's voice was low, dangerous. "Reasonably, sir," Davis stammered, standing his ground. "I saw her. She had this look, like she knew exactly what she was doing." Thorne's mind, a place of rigid order and established protocols, struggled to process the input. Petrova, the quiet, stubborn woman he had dismissed as a relic, a piece of bureaucratic dead weight. The woman he had ordered to stay out of the way. He grabbed a pair of binoculars from a nearby table and strode to the TOC's emergency exit, shoving the door open and stepping into the maelstrom of noise and dust. He raised the binoculars to his eyes, scanning the northern perimeter. And there she was, a small, still figure perched atop the HESCO barriers, almost perfectly camouflaged against the brown and gray landscape. Even from this distance, he could see the utter calm in her posture. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't even watching the now quiet enemy positions. She was scanning the opposite direction, toward the high mountain passes, as if anticipating the next move. On the radio, Ghost Lead's team was already exploiting the opening. Ghost Team is on the move. We're advancing on the flank. Thanks for the assist. Whoever you are, the SEALs, freed from their pin, moved with lethal speed, beginning to roll up the disorganized insurgent line. The tide of the battle had turned. It hadn't been turned by air support or by overwhelming force. It had been turned by 2 bullets. Thorne lowered his binoculars, a profound and unsettling reevaluation taking place behind his eyes. He had seen her as a problem to be managed. He had underestimated her based on her age, her gender, her civilian status. He had committed the cardinal sin of a commander. He had judged a weapon by its appearance and not by its effect. The curiosity that now burned in him was more intense than the desert sun. Who was she? Not the name on a personnel file, but the person who could make a rifle sing a song of death from over a kilometer away with the calm of a librarian shelving a book. He walked back into the TOC, the ambient noise of the room seeming to fade away. He looked at the intelligence officer. Get me everything you have on Anya Petrova. And I mean everything. Cross-reference it with CIA, DIA, every allied database we have access to. Use my override codes, the officer, sensing the gravity in his commander's voice, began typing frantically. The assumptions of the day were being shot to pieces, one by one. The initial insurgent assault was broken, but the fight wasn't over. The surviving attackers, routed and disorganized, fell back to a pre-planned secondary position, a small, defensible compound on the edge of the local village. As they retreated, they grabbed a handful of civilians who had been caught in the crossfire, 2 old men and a boy from a nearby farm. It was a desperate, cowardly act, but a tactically sound one. They now had human shields. Ghost Team, pursuing relentlessly, was forced to halt at the edge of the village. The new situation crackled over the radio, tense and fraught with peril. Viper Command, this is Ghost Lead. The enemy has dug in at the walled compound. Coordinates 049er. They have at least 3 hostages, confirmed civilian non-combatants. They're using them as cover. We can't get a clean shot from the TOC. Colonel Thorne could see the situation on a drone feed. A high-definition camera showed the scene in stark detail. The insurgent leader, a burly man with a black beard, was using one of the old men as a shield, holding a pistol to his head while his fighters returned fire from behind the compound walls. He would expose himself for only a second at a time, shouting defiance, before ducking back behind his terrified shield. It was a nightmare scenario. A frontal assault would be a bloodbath for the hostages. The SEAL snipers couldn't get an angle. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The political fallout from civilian casualties would be catastrophic. Thorne felt the cold grip of helplessness. He had all the military might of a superpower at his disposal, and it was all rendered useless by 1 man and 1 pistol. His career, the lives of the hostages, the lives of his men, it all hung in the balance. Then, a thought, born of desperation and a newfound, grudging respect, entered his mind. He grabbed the radio handset, bypassing the regular operator. His voice, when he spoke, was not that of a commander giving an order, but of a man making a plea. He broadcast on the command channel, hoping she was listening. Petrova, Anya Petrova. This is Colonel Thorne, a pause filled with static. If you can hear this, if you are listening, look at the drone feed for the village compound. You see the leader. You see the hostage. He paused again, the words catching in his throat. Can you make that shot? It was an admission of failure and a Hail Mary all in one. He was publicly ceding the most critical decision of the engagement to the civilian analyst he had scorned just that morning. He was asking for another miracle. There was no reply, only the wind and the distant, sporadic crack of gunfire. On the northern wall, Anya had not moved. She had been watching the village through her scope, anticipating this very scenario. She saw the leader, the hostage, the impossible sliver of a target. She saw the slight tremor in the old man's hands, the arrogant posture of the man holding him. She did her math again. 1,320 meters. The wind was stronger now, gusting unpredictably through the village alleys. The target was partially obscured and moving, and there was a human life an inch away from the point of impact. The question wasn't could she make the shot. The question was, should she? Anya Petrova did not answer Colonel Thorne's plea over the radio. Words were unnecessary. The question had been asked, and the answer would be delivered by action alone. She remained preternaturally still behind her rifle, her world compressed to the circular image in her scope. She saw the scenario not as a chaotic, emotional tableau, but as a complex physics problem. The variables were numerous and daunting. The distance, 1,320 meters. The wind, a swirling, 15 kilometers per hour crosswind that would push the bullet sideways nearly 2 meters over its flight path. The target, a man's head, partially obscured by another man's head. The window of opportunity, less than 2 seconds at a time. She saw the insurgent leader lean out again, shouting, his head exposed just over the shoulder of the terrified hostage. Anya's finger rested on the trigger. She didn't fire. It wasn't the right moment. The man's posture was wrong. He was leaning back, creating no separation. She waited. Her heart beat a slow, steady rhythm. Bottom, bottom. She let out half a breath and held it, her body locking into a state of absolute stability. In the TOC, everyone held their breath. Thorne watched the drone feed, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of a console. Ghost Lead and his team were motionless, their own rifles uselessly trained on the compound. The entire battle had paused, focused on this single, tense standoff. Then the moment came. The insurgent leader, in a fit of rage, shoved the hostage forward slightly to emphasize a point to his own men. For a fraction of a second, in that forward motion, the hostage's head dipped and the leader's head was completely exposed, a clear, unobstructed target framed against the mud wall behind him. The window was perhaps half a second long. It was not enough time for a normal human to react, aim, and fire. But Anya was not normal. She had not aimed for where he was, but for where he was going to be. Her mind had calculated his trajectory, the slight bob of his head, and her crosshairs were already waiting at the precise point in space where his temple would appear. The shot was an extension of thought. The report of the Dragunov was a flat, lonely sound against the immensity of the valley. The bullet, a 152-grain boat-tail projectile, traveled for nearly 2 seconds, an invisible messenger arcing across the sky. On the drone feed, the insurgent leader's head snapped back as if struck by an invisible hammer. He collapsed instantly, a lifeless puppet whose strings had been cut. The pistol clattered to the ground. The hostage, stunned and spattered with blood that was not his own, stood frozen for a moment before stumbling away, saved by a margin of millimeters. A stunned silence fell over the radios, over the TOC, over the battlefield. Then, Ghost Lead's voice, hushed and full of awe, "Jesus Christ," shot out, "Target down. Hostages are clear in the TOC." The intelligence officer who had been digging into Anya's background suddenly gasped. "Sir, Colonel, I've got it!" he exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement. Thorne tore his eyes from the screen. "What?" The officer turned from his monitor, his face pale. "Her file. It's almost entirely redacted. Level 5 classification. But I found a cross-reference in an old Cold War-era partner asset database. A single, unredacted line. It's a call sign," he paused, looking at his commander. "Sir, her call sign was Babushka." The name hung in the air, thick with unspoken history. To the younger officers, it meant nothing. But to Thorne, a student of military history, and to a few other senior NCOs in the room, it was the stuff of legend. Babushka, the ghost of the Zabarwin Range. A near-mythical sniper from a defunct Soviet-era Special Missions unit, credited with dozens of impossible shots during the Soviet-Afghan War and other forgotten conflicts. A ghost story old intelligence officers told to scare new recruits. She wasn't just a retired analyst. She was a living legend hiding in plain sight. The battle was over. The swift, shocking death of their leader broke the remaining insurgents' will to fight. They surrendered to Ghost Team moments later. The hostages were safe, whisked away by medics. The FOB returned to a state of controlled activity, the cleanup and after-action reports beginning. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The earlier buzz of combat had been replaced by a quiet, vibrating sense of awe. Ghost Team returned to the FOB an hour later. They were grim, covered in dust and sweat, their movements weary but efficient. They walked past the debriefing tent, past the medics offering water, past the other soldiers who stopped and stared. They moved as one unit, their purpose clear. They walked across the dusty compound, their destination the northern perimeter wall. Anya was still there. She had already broken down her rifle and was carefully, methodically cleaning each piece, her movements as precise and unhurried as before. She seemed self-contained, a universe of calm amidst the lingering adrenaline of the base. Lieutenant Commander Kalin, Ghost Lead, stopped a few feet in front of her. His team fanned out behind him, a silent phalanx of the world's most elite warriors. The young SEALs, men who projected an aura of supreme confidence and capability, looked at the old woman with an expression of profound, unadulterated respect. Kalin said nothing. Words were insufficient. Instead, he slowly brought his right hand up to his brow in a formal salute. It wasn't the crisp, parade ground gesture of a garrison soldier. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a gesture of battlefield fealty from one warrior to another. It was an acknowledgement of skill, of courage, of a shared, bloody profession. One by one, the other 6 members of his team followed his lead, their hands rising to salute the woman who had saved them. Colonel Thorne arrived just in time to witness the scene. He stopped, keeping his distance, feeling like an intruder on a sacred moment. He saw the 7 deadliest soldiers under his command rendering honors not to him, their commander, but to the civilian analyst he had belittled. The salute was a rebuke of his own arrogance and a testament to a truth he had forgotten. That true capability is not determined by rank, or age, or uniform, but by action. He watched as Anya slowly paused her cleaning. She looked up, her winter sky eyes meeting Kalin's. She didn't return the salute. She simply gave a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. The gesture said everything. Respect given, respect received. Thorne felt a wave of humility wash over him, so profound it was almost painful. He had been a commander, but she had been a guardian. He had been playing checkers while she was playing chess on a board that spanned mountains and decades. He gave his own small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent apology and a mark of his own newfound and absolute respect. The next morning, the sun rose over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. The harsh, unforgiving landscape of the previous day was momentarily softened, beautiful. On the northern perimeter wall, in the same spot from which she had turned the tide of battle, Anya Petrova sat on an empty ammunition can. Her rifle was nowhere in sight, locked securely in its case. In its place, she held a steaming mug of black tea in one hand and her old Steiner binoculars in the other. She was on watch. It was not a duty assigned to her. It was a state of being. She scanned the distant ridges, her eyes tracing the contours of the land, reading the subtle signs of the new day. The FOB hummed with renewed life below her. Soldiers moved with a different kind of purpose. Their glances toward the northern wall were no longer indifferent. They were furtive, filled with a mixture of reverence and fear. The story had spread like wildfire through the barracks and mess halls. The quiet old woman, the analyst, was Babushka. The ghost story was real, and she drank tea on their perimeter. They gave her a wide berth, affording her a bubble of solitude. They understood on a primal level that she was something other, something to be respected from a distance. As the sun climbed higher, a young soldier, PFC-chan, a communications tech from the TOC, approached her position. He walked hesitantly, as if approaching a sleeping lion. He stopped about 10 feet away, not wanting to intrude. Anya didn't turn, her gaze remaining fixed on the mountains. "Ma'am," Chun said, his voice quiet. She gave no sign she had heard. He took another tentative step forward and placed a fresh canteen full of cold water and a foil-wrapped protein bar on the sandbags near her, a small, humble offering. "Just in case you were hungry," he mumbled, then quickly retreated, casting one last look of awe over his shoulder before disappearing back into the maze of the base. Anya remained motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, she lowered her binoculars and glanced at the offered items. Her expression, usually an unreadable mask of stoicism, softened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something ancient and weary, but not unkind, passed through her eyes. She picked up the mug of tea, took a slow sip, and returned her gaze to the horizon. Her war was supposed to be over, a closed chapter in a life of shadows. But the work was never truly done. The legend of Babushka was no longer a redacted file or a whispered rumor. It was a physical presence, a guardian spirit sitting on a wall, watching over the children with guns. Her quiet dignity and earned respect as vast and silent as the mountains themselves.